This is The Outside View. Adam Collins, Izzy Westbury. It becomes the inside view for Women's Cricket Zone today because where we are in London, it's teeming with rain. But I've got Izzy by my side to talk about the two semi-finals, one which occurred and one which didn't occur, which means that India and Australia will be playing off in the decider at the MCG in front of probably 91,000 people on Sunday. So a great finish. The way we got there wasn't ideal. Australia did get on, which was great, but England and India didn't. So India qualified by virtue of the washout and their qualification position in the group stage. Izzy, let's go to the game that finished first, and we'll come back to the politics around the abandonment thereafter. Australia essentially held their nerve, especially with the ball and in the field, via Meg Lanning, as always.
I think you're just staying the execution for England's game. Meg Lanning, I think with Perry gone, out with her hamstring injury, you felt as though it was going to be either her or Healy. Lanning or Healy would step up, and Lanning is a leader of women, and that's what she did today. A knock of 49, runnable 49. It really held the innings together. They had a good start, and then there was at the moment, I don't want to say the classic Australian wobble, but really that has been happening throughout this tournament. There's been a bit of a wobble in the middle order, and Lanning, remember, hasn't really been in the runs that much, but you felt that this was the occasion for her to do it. Australia obviously wanted to be on that field slightly more than South Africa, perhaps, and I can think of no other scorecard, perhaps, that I would have written before than the one which we've seen today.
Yeah, at one stage they lost 3 for 3, sort of at the back end of the power play. They were shuffling the batting order. Jess Jonathan, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, came up to bat at number 4 ahead of Rachel Haynes and Ashley Gardner. But Lanning was there. She started off well. They pulled back, they consolidated. Lanning and Haynes laid the foundation. I have to say, though, South Africa bowled exceptionally well, I felt. Shabnim Ismail didn't take the wickets, but she was so frugal they couldn't get her away. And Nadine de Klerk, who was brought into the side, Marizanne Kapp, regrettably couldn't play in the semi-final. We mentioned it on the outside view yesterday that she was carrying a virus into the fixture. Regrettably, it kept her out. But de Klerk bowled exceptionally, taking 3 wickets, skiddling 2 Australian players along the way. And then, predictably, Izzy, after the innings was over, the rain came. And then we went back to that conversation of how many overs will constitute a game, which was 10 for the second innings, and how long will they need. And in the end, Australia, they won the game today by 5 runs, but in many respects they won by 9 minutes. Had 9 minutes more been lost in that rain delay, it would have been South Africa making it through.
Yeah, we almost got to a really bizarre scenario in which Australia had batted their 20 overs. And remember, we only needed to have 10 overs each innings to constitute a game. So you were kind of there thinking, well, why don't we just play 10 innings from the start for both sides? But that is the nature of cricket and the beauty of the regs. But I think, the rain stopped and then started at just the wrong time for South Africa as well. So I think, although you could argue the Duckworth-Lewis total was probably fair, it was at 98 they needed to get off their 13 overs, you felt that they, having kind of tied back Australia, okay, Lanning was there throughout, but as you say, a really good bowling display, a good fielding display, they would have come off that pitch at the innings interval and felt that they had a really good chance of it. But then just as that time that they had available just got whittled down, that panic starts to set in, and the game plans that you're used to in the past go out the window. And then it's just the emotion of the occasion as well. Australia is so keen to get out there to really start hard. I think that I just feel for South Africa. I mean, I know it's a running joke that South Africa and knockout matches in World Cups don't really go together, but that really did slip through their fingers, and there wasn't much more they could do.
Yeah, I felt for them as well on the basis that, like you say, like the emotional roller coaster of the day, they would have known sitting in the dressing rooms when that big shower hit between that they were this close to going through by default. Now, after play, Danae van Niekerk said she wouldn't want to have qualified for the final in that fashion. Credit to her. She's a class act, Van Niekerk, and always speaks her mind. She was obviously very emotional after the loss this evening. But when they went back on, they needed the skipper or the Lee probably to come off. In the absence of Marizanne Kapp, and neither did. They were both out inside the power play. Both hit big shots early on, and both didn't last much longer. So they're relying on the second tier players, I suppose you would say, and Laura Woolvart and Sune Luce, and neither of those players could immediately put the foot down because it's hard. I mean, the field is slow, the pressure's on, the Australian bowlers are world class, and suddenly you're asking them to score at 8 and over, which isn't unreasonable. I thought the Duckworth-Lewis calculation was perfectly fine, but it took them a while to get motoring. And by the time they did, there's probably a case for one of them to have retired out, to have got Chloe Tryon in earlier, because the run rate required suddenly was hovering around 12 or 13 and over, which is no easy feat in women's cricket.
I tell you what, I shed a tear for the off drive of Laura Woolvart, because that may well be the last time that we see her in international colours. She's got the opportunity, of course, to go on on and study medicine, become a doctor, and she was going at, I think her strike rate was over 150, the highest of anybody today. So a class player, young player, lots of talent, almost dug South Africa out of a bit of a hole, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah, it was the bankers for Australia, wasn't it, at the end? There was Megan Shute, there was Jess Jonathan. Delissa Kimmon's back into the side today. I thought she was quite outstanding. And Nicola Carey as well. She hasn't got the plaudits in this tournament, but she has been a pretty consistent operator in those middle overs. So they go through to the final, having won the game by 5 runs via the Duckworth-Lewis method. As I mentioned off the top, India go through as well without a ball being bowled. There was never any real prospect of a ball being bowled. It was sodden, it was awful. In order for them to have gotten on, they would have needed a lot of time, and they called it off. They didn't even wait until the time they could have gone. The umpire said, look, this isn't happening, go home. And Heather Knight, quite rightly, I think, Izzy said after play that she hopes their team are the last team who were ever eliminated from a major tournament in this fashion without a reserve day being available to them. We heard the line from the ICC today that the reason they didn't schedule a reserve day or explore the option of a reserve day was because they didn't have enough time and couldn't extend the tournament. But if the reserve day was on Friday, then that wouldn't have extended the tournament. It was a curious line they ran.
And it was a similar scenario that played out in the men's 50 over World Cup last year, where they could have done almost exactly the same.
Well, that's it, wasn't it? The second semi-final, we all remember that semi-final at Old Trafford between New Zealand and India, which was the first one. But there was provision for a reserve day between Australia and England. They would have played on the Friday, had it been rained out, ahead of a Sunday final. And this last time I checked, Birmingham's a good few hours from London after you factor in all the logistics, and Sydney's 1 hour from Melbourne on a flight. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that we could have got resourceful here.
Yeah, I think it's really frustrating how it's been handled. I think also the cover-up to an extent is worse than the actual fact itself. There's no allusion to gender bias here, because we already know that the men's T20 also isn't scheduled to have a reserve day in the knockout. So it feels a little bit of a botched kind of handling of it. It obviously wasn't thought about that well beforehand. Perhaps the prospect of raid in Australia is so alien that it wasn't contemplated. But I think I would have rather have seen from the ICC A, bit more flexibility, and B, if that wasn't possible, put your hands up and say, listen, we got it wrong. We've got to do better, because that's what we can do now, go forward. Yeah,
there was no contrition, was there? It was kind of like, no, it's a quick tournament. There's no way we're going to do it, and that is that. And Kevin Roberts, the CA chief executive, spoke about that yesterday. They looked into it from a host board perspective, but there was a rigidity there which meant they kind of couldn't progress to the next stage. And my position from the outset was that if India or South Africa rejected the premise, then so be it. That's just the way things are. They're within their rights to do that. But judging by Van Niekerk's comments this evening after play, they would have been in the cart for delaying their game until the Friday. And presumably India would have been able to have seen the bigger picture as well.
And listen, I mean, I'm a lawyer. I'm the first to sort of say that if you sign up for something, then you're bound by that. And you could also argue that England was signed up to these rules and therefore had to deal with any of the consequences, which they will do. And the same happened in the men's 50 over World Cup, when New Zealand signed up to the ridiculous countback and therefore suffered the consequences. But I think that in this situation where that sort of that appetite to get something on to appear at least a bit more equal and have the opportunity, as I think Van Niekerk was saying, to get through to the final on merit, it just seems to be a real big shame. And I think Knight, again, who must have been extremely emotional, spoke very calmly about hoping that they were the last team, pub quiz answer perhaps, the last team to get knocked out without facing a ball.
And I'm sure they will be. I mean, I'd be flabbergasted if the ICC now don't backflip ahead of the men's tournament. And look, and if they do, credit to them. If they backflip between now and October on this, I will celebrate the flexibility being showed there. I don't think any of us who follow the women's game closely will begrudge administrators for making a decision like that now that we've seen what can happen. It's regrettable, and Jeff Lemon, our colleague, made this point on social media, that why didn't anyone notice this before? It rains a lot in Sydney. One of the rainiest months of the year is March. Sydney is the wettest city in Australia as far as where capital cities, in terms of days lost of international cricket, I mean by that. I mean, surely at some point they might have thought, hang on a minute, we might need to think about the provision of a reserve day for the semi-final and cast ahead to this exact scenario playing out. So that's regrettable too, that not only the organisers but all of the boards who would have had to have signed off on it didn't pick up on it either, in exactly the same way as the boundary countback that you mentioned before, Izzy. I mean, that's something that, had we been looking, or had anyone been looking from the host boards, they would have thought, well, that's a preposterous way to resolve a World Cup.
And I think this is a concern for me in terms of the processes of setting out these tournaments, and you just wonder whether, so at the beginning of each tournament, before each tournament, all the boards, you say, come together and they agree the sort of the rules and the regs and how they're going to play to them. And I just wonder whether this has become so much of a kind of boilerplate, everyone just ticks a box and goes, lovely to see you, without actually looking into the detailed scrutiny. How many people actually went through the whole of the regs? I mean, I might be wrong, maybe they really scrutinised them really closely and decided that there wasn't going to be an issue. But I fear that actually it's a box ticking process rather than an actual scrutinising process, which is what it should be, of course.
Well, if I had my way, Izzy will be running World Cricket one day, and she'll be the one looking through it on behalf of a host board here, there, or the administrators, or something like that. The positive angle to take from this, of course, is that the MCG on Sunday, International Women's Day, this was the dream scenario that Australia would make it, and frankly, that India would make it. We talked about this before the last 50 over World Cup when they made the final against England at Lords, that the effect that had, the knock-on effect that had was significant, far bigger in India than any other country, and irrespective of whether they go on to hold the trophy up on Sunday night in front of what should be a capacity crowd of 91,000 people. I'm very lucky to be from Melbourne. I've been at the G with 91,000 or 100,000 indeed people there for football games in the past, and it is the most amazing theatre in sport, and I'm sure the players will live to enjoy this for the rest of their lives. But Izzy, this has got, it's not the way we would have wanted to have gotten there, but it is a pretty good result.
If I was to embrace a sort of utilitarian philosophy, I'd say that it's the means begot the ends. We've got there. It doesn't matter how we got there, but this is exactly what I think. I mean, ICC, when you asked them right at the beginning if they could dream up the ideal scenario at the MCG, it would be in India, it would be versus Australia. That's their best chance of filling out the MCG. I've been at the MCG for a full India match in the Men's World Cup in 2015. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And the day before, actually, I'd been at an Australian match, which had also been sold out against England. Completely different atmospheres. We're going to have this wonderful collision of the two different cultures, sporting cultures. I mean, I'm almost prone to get on a flight now and fly over to Australia, although they could give me a weather forecast first.
Yeah, well, I can guarantee one thing. It's not going to rain on Melbourne on Sunday. I had a look this afternoon. It looks all clear for Sunday. Of course, we'll be there watching the game ever so closely on Sunday for the Outside View. Thanks for your company. Make sure you follow Women's Cricket Zone on all the platforms for all the coverage from Australia. Adam Collins, Izzy Westbury signing off. We'll see you at the final.